The dining hall hummed with life as sailors poured in after another exhausting day of drills. Delicious smells of cooked chicken and warm bread mixed with the clatter of meal trays and endless chatter filling every corner. At one table, a crew of Navy SEALs lounged together, their voices carrying that special swagger earned through years of brutal training and dangerous missions. Jake Morrison sat among them, a highly decorated SEAL whose reputation came from 3 war-zone tours and more risky missions than he could count. His muscular frame and scarred hands showed what happens when you push yourself beyond normal limits for your nation. Jake had developed a sharp eye for reading people who walked into his world. It was a skill that kept him alive in dangerous places across the globe. As dinner continued, Jake spotted a woman in Navy uniform sitting by herself at a table not far away. She looked about 30, with dark hair styled according to regulations and a posture that screamed military through and through. What grabbed his attention wasn't just that she sat alone. It was how she held herself with calm strength while studying what looked like mission documents. Her uniform looked sharp and properly pressed, but Jake couldn't make out her rank from where he sat. Throughout his career, most women he'd worked with were either lower-ranking enlisted members or middle-grade officers in support jobs. This assumption felt natural to him, built from years in a field where women in fighting roles remained uncommon. Jake's buddies noticed him staring and looked over at the woman's table. Tommy Rodriguez, another SEAL famous for his jokes, smiled and elbowed Jake playfully. The crew had built a name for themselves with their friendly teasing, often chatting up newcomers or unknown faces as a way to lighten the mood and build bonds. "Why not go say hello?" Tommy suggested with a sneaky grin. "Looks like she could use someone to talk to." The others laughed, knowing Jake's habit of being straightforward in ways that sometimes came off rough. They'd watched him use humor and easy conversation to connect with people many times. Jake thought about it briefly, then stood up with the relaxed confidence of someone used to being in charge. He'd always thought treating everyone well mattered no matter their rank or job, but he also liked the casual vibe that happened during free time. The dining hall was usually a spot where strict military rules could ease up a bit, letting service members interact more personally. Walking toward the woman's table, Jake cleared his throat politely to get her notice. She glanced up from her paperwork with sharp brown eyes that seemed to read him completely in one look. Something in her face suggested she was used to curious people approaching her, though she waited quietly for him to start talking. "Evening," Jake said warmly, his hands loosely clasped behind his back in a comfortable military stance. "I'm Jake Morrison, and I saw you sitting here alone. Mind telling me what brings you to our part of the base?" His voice was friendly and inviting, the way he'd talk to anyone new arriving at the facility. The woman put down her papers and focused on him completely. Her face stayed neutral but not cold. She'd clearly been through this kind of conversation before and seemed to understand that Jake's approach came from interest rather than bad intentions. "Good evening," she answered simply, her voice holding a touch of amusement that Jake missed completely. Something about her collected manner fascinated Jake even more. Most people, especially those newer to military life, showed some nervousness when approached by a SEAL, considering their elite standing within the Navy rank. This woman, though, seemed totally relaxed, as if she belonged right where she was and had every reason to be there. Jake's interest deepened as he watched the woman's steady manner and professional bearing. Her uniform showed obvious signs of field work with slight wear marks suggesting she wasn't just another office worker. The way she held eye contact without appearing guarded or worried told him she felt comfortable in military settings and probably had serious experience dealing with all kinds of people. "I'm always curious about meeting fellow service members," Jake went on, settling into a more relaxed talking style, especially ones who look like they've been in real situations. He pointed toward the papers she'd been reading, noting they seemed to show tactical drawings and mission briefings rather than paperwork. The woman's mouth curved into a small smile that didn't quite touch her eye. She'd obviously heard versions of this talk many times, and Jake's guesses were playing out exactly as she'd expected. "I work in operations," she said briefly, neither expanding nor seeming bothered by his casual approach to what should have been a more formal introduction. Behind them, Jake's SEAL buddies had turned their focus to the exchange, interested to see how their friend would handle what seemed like a simple meet and greet with another service member. They'd seen Jake's people skills many times, and he had a track record for connecting with almost anyone through his blend of real interest and laid-back charm. "Operations, huh?" Jake nodded with approval. "That covers plenty of territory. Intelligence work, mission planning, supply management." He was fishing for more details, partly from work interest and partly because something about this woman hinted there was more to her background than showed on the surface. Her answers were carefully balanced, sharing just enough to be polite without giving away anything important. The woman leaned back a little in her seat, and Jake glimpsed metal ribbons on her uniform showing overseas duty and combat time. This surprised him more than he wanted to admit, since women with extensive combat awards were still fairly rare in his world. Most women he'd worked with in field roles had been in support jobs rather than direct combat assignments. A little of everything, honestly, she responded, her tone staying friendly but growing more amused by Jake's clear attempts to figure out her role and background. She seemed to enjoy the talk while also keeping a professional distance that showed she was used to handling conversations with interested male coworkers. Jake found himself truly impressed by her cool demeanor and started to think his early guesses about her rank and job might have been wrong. The confidence she showed wasn't the type that came from desk authority or school achievements, but the quiet certainty of someone who'd earned respect through real experience in tough situations. "Well, I've got to say you have a great poker face," Jake said with a smile, realizing she was skillfully dodging the specific answers he wanted. Most people are more open about their history when they meet a SEAL. Usually they're either nervous or too eager to wow us with their own background. The woman's smile widened slightly at this remark, and Jake noticed a spark in her eyes, suggesting she found his comment especially funny. "Is that right?" she replied, her tone now carrying a hint of playful pushback. "And what makes you believe I should be either scared or trying to wow you?" This answer caught Jake a bit off guard since it showed a level of confidence beyond what he usually saw from middle-rank officers or enlisted folks. Most people acknowledged the special status of SEALs, even if they didn't show obvious nervousness. Her easy dismissal of his implied status suggested either remarkable self-confidence or experience matching his own. Jake's teammates had paused their own talks and were now openly watching the back and forth with building interest. They could sense something unusual developing, though none could quite identify what made this chat different from Jake's typical casual meetings with base folks. Tommy Rodriguez nudged the SEAL next to him and whispered, "Look at Jake's body language. He's actually working hard for this conversation." The comment was spot on. Jake's normally effortless social confidence seemed to be meeting its equal in this composed woman who refused to be impressed by his credentials or reputation. Meanwhile, Jake found himself genuinely interested in this mystery woman who seemed immune to the usual patterns governing talks between SEALs and other military members. Her uniform showed the patches of someone with field experience, but her calm authority hinted at something more important than a typical middle-level assignment. "You know what?" Jake said, his tone becoming more straightforward as his interest won over his usual diplomatic style. "I'm just going to ask directly. You're clearly not nervous about talking to a SEAL. You've got combat ribbons showing serious field time, and you're sitting here reading what looks like secret mission briefings. So help me understand, what's your actual rank?" The question hung between them, and several nearby talks seemed to quiet as other people unconsciously tuned in to what was becoming an increasingly fascinating exchange. The woman put down her papers entirely and gave Jake her complete attention, as if she'd been waiting for him to ask this exact question. "You really want to know?" she asked, her tone hinting that Jake might not be ready for the answer he was requesting. There was no anger in her voice, but the patient amusement of someone who'd experienced this scene many times and knew exactly how it would unfold. Jake nodded with certainty, sure that whatever her rank, it couldn't be significant enough to fundamentally alter how their talk was going. In his experience, most people on base fell within an expected range of ranks and jobs, and even high-ranking officers usually acknowledged the elite status and special training SEALs brought to military work. "Absolutely," he answered, crossing his arms and settling into a more relaxed position. "I've been trying to figure it out since I walked over, and you've done a great job keeping me wondering, but I don't give up when something grabs my attention, and you've definitely grabbed my attention." The woman looked around the dining hall, noting how many people were now watching their conversation. Jake's teammates weren't even pretending to focus on their own food anymore, and folks at several nearby tables had turned to watch what looked like an increasingly important exchange. She seemed to reach a decision, sitting straighter in her chair and meeting Jake's look directly. "All right, Jake Morrison," she said, using his name for the first time and somehow making it sound both friendly and official. "Since you ask so directly, I'll give you a direct answer." The mood in their immediate area had shifted noticeably, with even the background noise of the dining hall seeming to lower as more people became aware something important was unfolding. Jake kept his confident look, though something in the woman's tone suggested he was about to receive information that would seriously change his understanding of their talk. "Before I answer," she continued, "I want you to know I've enjoyed our conversation. You seem like a truly good person, and your team over there clearly respects you. What I'm about to tell you isn't meant to embarrass you or make you feel stupid. Sometimes assumptions are natural, especially in places like this where certain patterns tend to repeat." Jake's confidence wobbled slightly at this introduction, as it suggested his question was about to be answered in a way he hadn't expected. The woman's careful setup showed that whatever her rank, it was significant enough to need this kind of diplomatic preparation. The woman reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out her military ID card, placing it face up on the table between them. Jake glanced down at the card and felt his face freeze as his mind processed what he was seeing. The rank symbol showed 4 silver stars, the unmistakable mark of a full admiral. Admiral Sarah Mitchell, she said simply, her voice carrying the quiet power that came with decades of distinguished service and command responsibility. I'm the new commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, which means I'm actually your highest boss within the SEAL community. The words struck Jake like a punch, and he felt his face heat with a mixture of embarrassment and shock. Around them, the dining hall had gone noticeably quieter as word of the Admiral's presence started spreading through the room. People who'd been casually watching their conversation suddenly understood they were witnessing something far more significant than a routine social chat. Jake's teammates sat in stunned silence, their earlier amusement replaced by a growing realization of just how badly their friend had read the situation. Tommy Rodriguez looked like he wanted to vanish into his chair, while the others stared in amazement at the unfolding scene that would surely become legendary within their unit. Admiral Jake managed to say, his voice barely louder than a whisper as the full weight of his casual approach began to sink in. He had just spent the last 15 minutes treating one of the most senior officers in the Navy as if she were a junior colleague, asking personal questions and making assumptions that now seemed incredibly bold. Admiral Mitchell picked up her ID card and returned it to her pocket, her face staying calm and understanding. "Please sit down," she said, pointing to the chair across from her. "You look like you're about to faint, and that won't help either of us." Jake dropped into the offered chair, his thoughts racing as he tried to process the situation. Everything about their conversation suddenly made complete sense. Her unshakable confidence, her amusement at his guesses, her total lack of nervousness when faced with the SEAL's typical social approach. She had been politely putting up with his wrong ideas while probably being entertained by his increasingly bold attempts to figure out her history. "I need to apologize," Jake started. But Admiral Mitchell raised a hand to stop him. "For what?" she asked, genuinely. "For treating me like a fellow human being instead of a rank? For having a normal conversation without too much formality? Jake, you've done nothing wrong. If anything, this chat has been refreshing." Her words were comforting, but Jake still felt the weight of his assumptions and the casual way he had approached someone who outranked nearly everyone on base. The Admiral had been gracious enough to engage with his questions and even seemed to enjoy the talk, but he couldn't shake the feeling he had fundamentally misread the entire situation. Around them, other people were starting to recognize Admiral Mitchell, and Jake could see the ripple effect of awareness spreading through the dining hall. Service members were subtly fixing their posture and lowering their voices, responding to the presence of such high-ranking leadership, even as the Admiral herself kept her relaxed manner. "Ma'am," Jake said, falling back on military rules as he struggled to find the right word. "I had no idea who you were. If I had known, you would have treated me completely differently." Admiral Mitchell finished for him, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You would have been formal, respectful, and probably wouldn't have approached me at all, which is exactly why I didn't immediately tell you who I was." This revelation added another layer to Jake's understanding of what had just happened. The Admiral hadn't simply tolerated his casual approach. She had actively encouraged it by keeping quiet about her rank and position. She had wanted to see how he would interact with someone he saw as a peer or someone lower ranking, which suggested this meeting might have been more planned than he'd initially thought. Admiral Mitchell leaned forward slightly, her look becoming more serious as she continued their talk. "Jake, I want you to understand something important. I've been watching your team for the past week since I arrived on base. Your reputation for leadership and mission success goes before you. But what impressed me most was how you and your teammates interact with other people during off-duty hours." Jake listened carefully, still processing the strange nature of receiving feedback from someone whose rank placed her among the most senior officers in the entire Navy. The Admiral's words suggested his approach to her hadn't been a random event, but part of a pattern she had been watching on purpose. "Leadership isn't just about what happens during missions or formal meetings," Admiral Mitchell continued. "It's about how you treat people when you think no one important is watching. The fact that you approached me with genuine interest rather than trying to impress me or show dominance tells me something valuable about your character." Around them, the dining hall had settled into an unusual quiet, with people continuing their meals but clearly aware something significant was happening at the Admiral's table. Jake's teammates remained frozen in place, unsure whether they should come over or keep their distance while their friend navigated this unusual situation. "Ma'am, I appreciate your viewpoint," Jake replied, starting to regain some of his composure. "But I have to admit, I made a lot of assumptions about you based on limited information. That's not a leadership quality I'm particularly proud of." Admiral Mitchell nodded approvingly at his honest self-reflection. Good leaders recognize their mistakes and learn from them. "But tell me, what assumptions did you make specifically?" The question forced Jake to face his own biases more directly than he felt comfortable with. But he recognized the admiral was offering him a chance for real growth, rather than simply delivering a scold. I assumed you were probably a middle-rank officer, possibly in a support role. I didn't seriously think you might outrank me by a lot. And I definitely didn't expect to find a four-star admiral sitting alone in the enlisted dining hall. And why do you think you made those assumptions? Admiral Mitchell asked, her tone staying conversational despite the weight of the question. Jake considered his answer carefully, knowing his response would reveal something important about his worldview and professional outlook. Honestly, because in my experience, senior officers, especially at the flag level, don't typically eat in the same spaces as enlisted people and junior officers. And because he paused, recognizing his next words would touch on sensitive ground. Because I'm a woman, Admiral Mitchell finished gently without any hint of accusation in her voice. And because female officers at the four-star level are still rare enough that most people don't expect to encounter them in casual settings. Her directness in addressing the obvious actually made Jake feel more comfortable, as it showed she understood the complex dynamics at play without taking personal offense. Yes, ma'am, that was definitely part of it. I've worked with highly capable female officers throughout my career, but none at your level of seniority. Admiral Mitchell smiled at his honesty. I appreciate your frankness, Jake. The truth is, those assumptions are understandable given the current makeup of senior military leadership. What matters is how quickly you're willing to adjust your thinking when faced with new information. She pointed toward the mission briefing she'd been reading when Jake first approached. These documents contain early plans for a series of joint operations that will need close teamwork between SEAL teams and regular naval forces. Your unit has been specifically recommended for several key assignments based on your recent performance review. The conversation had taken an unexpected turn toward work matters, and Jake found himself genuinely interested in the mission implications of what Admiral Mitchell was describing. Despite the unusual circumstances of their meeting, she was clearly someone whose strategic thinking and tactical knowledge commanded respect regardless of rank or gender. As their talk continued, Jake began to understand that Admiral Mitchell's presence in the dining hall hadn't been accidental. Her decision to eat among enlisted people and junior officers rather than in the senior officers' dining area was a deliberate choice that reflected her leadership philosophy and approach to command. Ma'am, may I ask why you chose to eat here tonight? Jake ventured, his interest overcoming his lingering embarrassment about the earlier misunderstanding. Admiral Mitchell's face brightened at the question. Because this is where I learn the most about the people under my command. Formal briefings and official reports tell me what's happened. Conversations like ours tell me who's making it happen. The character and quality of people at every level ultimately determines mission success more than any tactical plan or technology advantage. Her answer resonated with Jake's own experience as a team leader, where he'd learned that understanding his teammates as individuals was crucial to effective leadership during high-stress missions. The Admiral's willingness to seek out informal chats suggested a depth of leadership experience that went far beyond desk work. Besides, Admiral Mitchell added with a slight grin, the food is actually better down here. The senior officers' dining room tends to focus on presentation over taste, and after spending months eating field rations during my last deployment, I prefer substance over style. This casual comment about recent deployment time caught Jake's attention, as it suggested the Admiral maintained operational involvement rather than purely desk duties. You mentioned a recent deployment, ma'am. If it's not classified, may I ask what? Eastern Mediterranean, coordinating naval support for counterterrorism operations. Admiral Mitchell replied without hesitation. 3 months aboard a carrier, working directly with SEAL teams and other special operations units. It was my first extended sea duty since making flag rank, and it reminded me why I joined the Navy in the first place. Jake's respect for the Admiral increased significantly with this revelation. Many senior officers moved to purely desk roles as they advanced in rank, but Admiral Mitchell had clearly maintained her commitment to operational leadership, even at the 4-star level. Her combat ribbons and field experience now made complete sense within the context of her hands-on approach to command. That explains why you weren't intimidated by talking to a SEAL, Jake said with genuine admiration. You've actually worked with teams like ours in operational environments, Admiral Mitchell confirmed, which is why I was particularly interested in watching how your team interacts during downtime. The relationships and trust that develop during off-duty hours often determine how effectively units perform when lives are on the line. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Jake's teammate, Tommy Rodriguez, who had finally worked up the courage to join them despite his obvious nervousness about the situation. Excuse me, Admiral Mitchell, Tommy said, his voice slightly strained with the effort of maintaining military protocol. I wanted to apologize for our earlier behavior. We had no idea who you were. Admiral Mitchell gestured for Tommy to sit down, expanding their informal gathering to include more of Jake's team. Please join us, and there's no need to apologize for treating me like a human being rather than a rank. If anything, I should thank you for giving me the opportunity to have a normal conversation for once. As Tommy settled into his chair, still clearly amazed by the surreal nature of the situation, Admiral Mitchell addressed both SEALs directly. I want to discuss something important with both of you. The upcoming operations I mentioned will require exceptional leadership at the team level, and both your names have come up repeatedly in planning discussion. The Admiral's shift to operational matters signaled their informal conversation was evolving into something more professionally significant. Jake and Tommy exchanged glances, recognizing they were being offered insight into future missions that would likely define their careers and test their abilities in new ways. As the evening went on, Admiral Mitchell's impromptu gathering had grown to include Jake's entire SEAL team, creating an unprecedented informal briefing session in the middle of the enlisted dining hall. Other people continued to watch from a respectful distance, clearly fascinated by the sight of a four-star admiral engaged in casual conversation with a group of operators. Gentlemen, Admiral Mitchell began, addressing the assembled team. What happened here tonight illustrates something crucial about military effectiveness. Jake approached me based on curiosity and genuine interest in connecting with a fellow service member. He made assumptions, yes, but he also demonstrated the kind of initiative and people skills that make exceptional leaders. She looked directly at Jake as she continued. Your willingness to engage with someone you didn't recognize, to ask direct questions when you wanted information, and to maintain respect throughout our conversation despite your initial assumptions. These are exactly the qualities we need in senior non-commissioned officers and junior officers. Tommy shifted uncomfortably in his seat, still processing the surreal nature of receiving career guidance from one of the most senior officers in the Navy during what had started as an ordinary dinner break. Admiral, we all learned something important tonight about not judging people based on appearances or assumptions. True, Admiral Mitchell agreed, but the lesson goes deeper than that. Military effectiveness depends on our ability to see people as individuals, rather than just ranks or role. Jake treated me as a person first, which allowed us to have a genuine conversation. That's the foundation of trust, and trust is the foundation of everything we do in combat. She pulled out a business card and handed it to Jake. I want you to contact my aide tomorrow morning. We're going to be restructuring how we select and train team leaders for special operations, and I want your input on the process. Your experience tonight, both the successful parts and the learning moments, will be valuable in developing better leadership development programs. Jake accepted the card with a mixture of pride and lingering disbelief. What had started as a casual conversation had evolved into a career opportunity that could potentially impact not just his own future, but the training and development of future SEAL leaders. Thank you, man. I won't let you down. I know you won't, Admiral Mitchell replied with confidence. And Jake, don't change your approach to meeting new people. The military needs leaders who see individuals rather than just uniforms and rank. Your natural curiosity and willingness to engage across perceived hierarchies is exactly what we need more of, not less. As Admiral Mitchell prepared to leave, she addressed the entire team one final time. Gentlemen, you've all witnessed something important tonight. Leadership isn't about intimidating people or demanding respect based on rank alone. It's about earning trust through character, competence, and genuine care for the people you serve with. Jake demonstrated those qualities tonight, which is why this conversation became an opportunity rather than a disciplinary action. The Admiral stood and the entire dining hall rose with her in a spontaneous show of respect that went beyond formal protocol. She acknowledged the gesture with a slight nod, then turned back to Jake's team. I look forward to working with all of you in the coming months. The operations we're planning will test every aspect of your training and leadership abilities, but based on what I've observed tonight, I'm confident you're ready for the challenge. As Admiral Mitchell walked toward the exit, the normal sounds of the dining hall gradually resumed, though the energy remained charged with the recognition that everyone present had witnessed something extraordinary. Jake's teammates gathered around him, their faces mixing admiration, amusement, and disbelief at how their friend's simple attempt at friendly conversation had evolved into a career-defining encounter. Well, Tommy said finally, breaking the silence that had settled over their table. I guess that's one way to get noticed by senior leadership. Though next time maybe we should check ID cards before you start your charm offensive. Jake laughed, finally able to see the humor in the situation now that it had concluded so positively. Lesson learned, but you know what? I'm glad it happened exactly the way it did. If I had known who she was from the beginning, we never would have had that conversation, and I never would have learned what I learned tonight about leadership, assumptions, and the importance of treating everyone with respect regardless of rank. The evening had transformed from a routine meal into a defining moment that would be retold in SEAL circles for years to come, serving as both an entertaining story and a valuable lesson about the unexpected opportunities that arise when genuine human connection transcends military hierarchy.